Hello, everyone. Welcome to Snap Take. I'm Glazer of the Snap Judgments podcast, the official podcast of Marvel Snap Zone, and today we have something special for you. I went through and found the top 5 Conquest decks that you should be taking to infinity based on the numbers. I'm going to go over my methodology for how to do this and much, much more over the course of this video. This is part 1 of a 2-part video. I'll explain what the second part is later in the video. As we go on, you should subscribe. Every single weekday, we bring you at least 2 brand new decks. These 2 decks are meant to keep you ahead of the meta. They're decks that are good, that are strong before the meta is aware of them, and they help you reach infinite, get infinity, achieve all your Marvel Snap goals. Let's move on to the second reason you subscribe, and that is we have the single biggest giveaway in the history of Marvel Snap going on right now and for the rest of this week. The giveaway ends Sunday, next Sunday. We are giving away 5 season passes, and we are adding another season pass for each 200 subscribers. We're already up to 6 season passes we're giving away. We are also giving away to 3 of the winners a Marvel Snap Zone premium subscription, which includes coaching by the Legendary Den, which is a $50 value you'll get for free, and 1 grand prize of the $75 Death Becomes Her bundle, which not only comes with a great death variant, but comes with enough progression value to get you a Series 5 card. So that will be 1 grand prize, at least 6 season passes, and 3 Snap Zone premiums. To enter, you just subscribe on YouTube, follow, like, and retweet the tweet in the description to this video, and reply to the tweet with what content creator you'd like to see on our podcast. Nice and simple. All right, all good? First, I'd like to thank Educated Collins. In this video right here, the always amazing Educated Collins finds the 15 most popular archetypes for Conquest and Marvel Snap and includes a bunch of tech tips for each. You should really check out this video. When I press space to change slides, by the way, it's going to play it. But you should really check out this video as sort of a companion piece to what I'm doing here. I used his information for the 15 most popular decks. All right, these are the 15 most popular decks. We're going to go over them very quickly. What I did with each is I went to each of the different major websites that keep stats for Marvel Snap games. I went to Untapped, Snap.fan, and our home, Marvel Snap Zone, and I pulled the Conquest Gold stats. Specifically, we're looking at Conquest Gold because that's always going to be a competitive game, no nonsense game, and I pulled the stats for each of the decks. Negative, specifically Negative Surfer, is 53, 54, and 49% win rates. It's the most popular deck, and it honestly should not be. Despite its fun, it really struggles in Conquest to win more than half the time. You're going to see a lot of decks that are far superior. Thanos Control, thanks to our friend W, is the cream of the crop with 62, 62, and 63% win rates. Absolutely must play. Phoenix Force, which is the deck I got one of my 2 Infinity tickets with, and I haven't been playing a ton of Conquest Gold, but I got one Infinity ticket with Phoenix Force and one with Legion. This deck has been really great for me, but the numbers say it's even worse than negative at 52, 50, and 53%, which means, again, you probably don't want to be playing this in Conquest, especially in Infinity. Legion is 59%, not applicable, couldn't find the stats, and 50%. The 59% is like top of the line playable, whereas the 50% is basically unplayable. Legion is new, and newness breeds volatility. It's something I would avoid if you have a limited number of Infinity tickets. Hela, one of my babies, one of my favorite things to play, is 54%, 50%, and 47%. You're too likely to run into a hard counter to the deck with like a Cosmo in the right spot or whatever and lose a lot of cubes for this deck to really sing. These are the Tribunal Hela decks, and they are not super viable despite their high play rate. Look, I play them a lot too. Galactus Nimrod is 58%, 53%, and 36%. I don't know what to make of these stats. I think the high rate on Untapped is showing that Galactus works really well as a surprise card in a lot of decks, but is not specifically Nimrod decks, but is not great in decks built wholly for Galactus at this exact moment. Excuse me. So Again, that's a lot of volatility in those numbers and something I'm going to avoid. One of the top decks right now is High Evolution Lockdown. That's the one that's running Professor X and Spider-Man and so on. 60%, 58%, 55%. This is a very, very powerful deck and worth considering if you're good at it. If this is your style, you should know it by now. Keep going. One of the big surprises for me was how low discard is at 54%, 47%, and 51%. Discard seemed like it would be really well positioned, especially once Spider-Ham went away and Apocalypse sort of came back into the meta. But it turns out it's probably just too predictable, much like Galactus used to be, where there's a predictability, unless it's so much more powerful than everything, that predictability lets opponents be able to beat it. This shocked me because this is higher win rates than Sera ever shows on ladders. Sera is a cube rate winner, not a pure win rate deck. So Sera got 62%, 62%, and 60% on the 3 sites, which puts it right at the top, right? Like that makes it one of the top couple decks. It's must play. Sera is like above and beyond right now. Shuri, 59, 62, 59, a little less good than Sera, a little less good than Thanos Control. Still better than Evolution Lockdown. It is a top play. We're talking Shuri Sauron, Shuri Zero, the classic builds here. They are still good. They are still legit. Surfer was great into bounce, and without bounce, it's fallen off a cliff at 56, 52, and 47%. It's time to stop playing Surfer, I think. Unless you are a top line Surfer player, just move on. Darkhawk has 57, 60, and 54, which is really great, right? Like that's gonna make the list. The stature version has 62% though. I couldn't pull just the stature version on the other sites, but the stature version really puts this one over the top, and Darkhawk is worth playing. And Lockjaw has apparently not been played like at all on Snap.fan, but it is 57 and 53%, which is perfectly respectable. It's a thing you can do right now, but not the thing to do. Those are the decks so far with my quick thoughts on each. We've got so much more. Don't go anywhere. Next up, we have the top 5 decks. These are the 5 decks we're going to look at today that we're going to say that you should focus on and play. And like there was like a 0.4% difference between Evolution, Lockdown, and Darkhawk. Darkhawk also got the benefit because that stature list was so good. What we're going to do is we're going to look at the most popular version of each and how to play it and how to play against it. That's what we're going to do. The most popular version of the 5 decks, how to play them. These are what I think you should take into Conquest Infinite. Before we go any further, though, the other thing we're going to do in later's video is I took these same decks. And I went to the most recent major tournament and I found the best performing version of each in that tournament. Tournaments are similar to Conquest, so that is a similar way to look at the game. So these are the most popular, broadly speaking, largest sample size decks, and then we've got the smallest sample, highly successful decks coming later today. I hope you find that interesting. Hope you find that comparison interesting. Let's talk about these decks from least recommended to most recommended. The least recommended deck right now is the Evo Lockdown Standard. This is your absolute bog standard build. It wants to basically, this like has a low 60% win rate, which is really, really high for Conquest Gold. So like this ends up being really good. It basically wants to Storm and Cyclops to win one lane, Professor X and Spider-Man for another, and if it gets one of those lanes, ideally Hulk is big enough to lock the game down. And if Hulk is not big enough to lock the game down, well, that's what Doom is for, and hopefully you can spread enough power around to get the win. I'm a little surprised to see Daredevil in the highly successful version of this. Usually, especially with Storm, you can read what to do on that Cyclops Professor Spider-Man turn, but Daredevil gives you that like guarantee. There's no 50-50 guessing. There's no getting outplayed. You know what they're going to play, and you can decide. You should reasonably be able to win the Storm lane, barring, I guess, Legion, because Storm, Cyclops, and Nebula are like a phenomenal amount of power in that lane, and you're just really strong and really consistent. To play against this deck, I mean, Legion like stomps out that Storm, which I think is why it's sort of falling off a little bit right now, and it doesn't love the double She-Hulk stuff because like Magic can stomp out Storm and go wide around it. If it gets its lockdown shut down, there's not enough power to win. So it needs to lock down a lane. You counter this by trying to fight that lockdown. You've played this deck. This is one of the most popular decks in the game for like the last 3 months. But it is still extremely strong. Our next deck is the classic meta Darkhawk. This is the 62% Darkhawk deck I was talking about. This deck has been around for even longer than the evolutionary deck. This spent a while as the best deck in the game and has taken 4 nerfs already because of it. Black Bolt lost to power, Statue lost to power, Rockslide lost to power, and Enchantress lost to power. Despite all of those single power losses, this still maintains a dominant win rate. It is absolutely phenomenal. Nebula helps control what and where your opponent plays. Zabu is absolutely incredible, specifically for like one of the best plays in the game remains Korg, Zabu, Rockslide. At that point, your opponent has 3 rocks in their deck. They're so likely to draw a rock, and then you're up on draws. You really, really want to save Darkhawk to late with this deck, unless you decide to, for some reason, maybe a daily mission, run Phoenix, then you can drop Darkhawk all in. If you get chunked, you just bring it back as like an even bigger card. Not a terrible play. Your general goal here as you go on in the game is to you can get your move going for turn 4 and then play something like Miles Morales with Polaris, or Miles Morales with Darkhawk, or Miles Morales with Korg, or you can get your move going before turn 6 after a Black Bolt, and then you can play either Darkhawk, Shang-Chi, or Enchantress with Miles Morales and Stature. Both of these are still huge, huge plays. Everything in this deck is reasonably well statted, except I guess Sabu and Korg. Nebula ends up well statted by the end, and Shang-Chi is fundamentally a 4 infinity, depending on what you're going to play. This deck has massive power. It remains super consistent. The Nebula is really a key piece. I like Ghost in that spot personally. I always have, because I want my Shang and Enchantress to do what they're going to do. I want my opponent to feel safe, and then when I drop that, them to basically be screwed. A lot of these decks run Killmonger right now. A lot run Iron Lad in America. We'll talk more about those options tomorrow. Playing against this deck is usually as simple as saying, I'm going to go over the top. This deck does not put out the most power in the world if it doesn't see its control pieces in the right order, or you can make sure it keeps priority and make a big turn at the end. There's not always a whole lot this deck can do about that. It also falls up like the Magic Double She-Hulk, just puts up way too much power. This is the Destroyer Nimrod standard deck. This deck is built entirely around one concept. It is go Shuri, go Nimrod. Iron Lad is there as an extra way to go Shuri, go Nimrod. If you can get that going, your goal is to then either Zola that Nimrod to put 24 power in the 2 lanes that were not previously there, or Venom and Carnage, or Venom and Deathlock, or Carnage and etc., Venom and Deathlock. You definitely want Venom to be one where possible. That Nimrod in one lane, and then another lane, and then like you'll keep that 12 center. You'll get another 12, at least 12, when the Nimrod bounces back from Carnage to another place, and you're adding 24 to 2 lanes that way. Iron Lad works amazingly as an extra Shuri, especially if you end up Venoming. Iron Lad works amazingly as an extra Nimrod if you didn't see Nimrod. There are bad hits you're going to have to run. Be ready to run early with this deck. It's fine. The world's not going to end. I don't love the Psylocke here. I don't run her in my versions of this, but she is very good. If you can Psylocke out the Nimrod early, you can make enough extra Nimrod clones by playing your Venom Carnage early and then Zolaing to make up for the difference in play and basically fill the board with Nimrods. Nova is also a great way to get a little bit of extra power on Nimrod. Wolverine is just an extra card that gets bounced around the board by all these effects and gains power every time. America is your consistency piece. I don't really love playing Destroyer in this, but if you go Shuri, Nimrod, Destroyer, look, sometimes 30 power in one lane and then 12 in 2 others is going to win, especially if a lane is locked up. Feel free to take those victories, obviously. 15 power in one lane and then 12 in 2 others. And you can even play Destroyer in a lane that will make Nimrod come to it for 27 power lane. Right? Yeah, 27 power lane. one place and a 12 in another, that's going to win like a, I don't know, Dark Dimension type location. This deck is really cool. It's really powerful. It's not one of my favorites. This is honestly, with Cosmo and Armor back on the rise, not a deck I would play, but the stats still suggest that this is really good. So if the stats are suggesting this is really powerful, then it's at least worth looking at and considering. Or Shuri Sauron, this is a bog standard list. This was even older than the previous list. This deck, I mean, goes back forever, right? Like, this deck is basically, as soon as Shuri hit Series 4, became one of the best decks in the game, right when Zabu and Surfer were nerfed. So, like, this deck's basic gist is it wants to either drop Sunspot and Armor, or drop 0 into Maw, 0 into Lizard. Then it plans to play Sauron, Shuri, play Red Skull, 28 power there, 30 plus the shit with the Shuri, and then you Taskmaster for a second 28 power card. You have your backup plays of on turn 4 you Shuri, turn 5 you skip, ideally getting 5 power on Sunspot in the process. Turn 6 you play an 18 power She-Hulk and an 18 power Taskmaster. That's not 28 and 28, but it is still a really strong last turn. If you need to, you can use Typhoid Mary as a backup Red Skull. 20 power is nothing to sniff at. You can also, if you're missing Shuri, drop things like Typhoid Mary and Red Skull, and then last turn potentially Enchantress them away. If you've played Sauron, obviously you don't need the Enchantress for that, but Enchantress is a free high roll that just wins some matchups. Those Surfer decks that can go over you are so sad when you just drop an Enchantress on their Iron Man, right? Or their Wong. Like, all of a sudden, you're dropping 28 points and their game plan is collapsing. So there's a lot of powerful things this deck can do. It's still really good and really linear. If you struggle with the game at all, this is a great deck to play because it's super straightforward. It's also, unless I'm missing something, completely Series 3, which is a really, really great place to start. Spoiler, coming up in the next couple days, I'm doing my top 5 Series 3 decks. This is going to be, excuse me again, this is absolutely 100% going to be one of them, maybe even number 1. Sera Control is always in the meta. This is a version that tries to play around with the bounce cards, still, while maintaining control. It ditches Invisible Woman, which was like a foundational piece to the deck for a while, because losing priority is no longer quite as hard as it was against bounce. Your basic idea is you're playing Kitty and then playing everything else slightly off curve. So you want to go Kitty into Kitty Nova, into Kitty Angela, Angela Kitty, into Bishop Kitty. And now you're on your Sera turn, and your last turn is going to be a basically a Scarlet Witch or Sentinel, depending on if there's a magic out that you want to destroy, a Mysterio, a Hitmonkey, and a Kitty. And you're just adding a massive amount of power. You can even throw a Killmonger in there if you don't see Hitmonkey, or you think that's a better play based on what your opponent has. Killmonger on 3 is also not a terrible play right now. There's a lot of powerful things that shuts down. This deck is very strong, but it needs to see its pieces in the right order. One of the best things for this deck, in my experience, is Magic. I actually run Magic in mine. Because the extra turn means it's so much more likely to draw its key pieces. And if it draws its key pieces, it just wins the game. Right? Like, when this deck draws its pieces, it is really hard to beat as long as it can throw priority. The best way to beat this deck, I think, is generally to give it priority, and then you can outpower it. It's not going to be the most powerful thing in the game. It's going to put a good amount of power down, right? Like, you can't just be playing a diddly deck to beat it. But if you can outpower it, you can win. The fear is, like, even the double She-Hulk decks that are relying on Magic have to be wary of Scarlet Witch. So, like, Magic isn't even always a good play, but you should still be able to do the 4, skip 5, double play on 6, and throw priority in the process, which should have some chance of giving you the game. This deck is really good against the number 1 deck because Killmongering a bunch of stones is great. But again, this is going to be an extremely draw-dependent deck. If you're good with it, though, it's like your opponent can feel helpless. Like, there's too many control pieces and you're getting too big at the same time as you're playing them. Our last deck for the morning is W's Snap Ballerina Thanos. We've seen several versions of this. I believe most are now running Luke Cage over Super Skrull. I still like Super Skrull more there, but I could see it going either way. I think that's like obviously the swing spot. Your goal here, your like major goal is to on turn 3 get Sunspot or a Time Stone down. And if you can get Sunspot or a Time Stone down, you can Professor X on turn 4. If you Professor X on turn 4, you're like really, really set. Law can add power to that lane. Jeff can add power to that lane. If you win that lane, the game is like really tough. Opponents will also often play Professor X. You got a Super Skull for that, or for their Iron Man, or for whatever else. If you can Spider-Man on turn 5, you're fine. You know exactly what math, more or less, you need to win the game on turn 6. And to do that, you have Devil Dinosaur, Thanos, Blue Marvel, and Claw. Iron Lad adds an extra high roll, whether that high roll be Shang-Chi, a Jeff, ideally a Professor X or Spider-Man. All of these high rolls can win the game. Everything here is super synergistic. W's a phenomenal player. This deck is a very high skill cap deck, but it's also a deck that across the 3 sites we looked at all have a 62-ish% win rate, which is top of the line in the game's history. Win rate, this deck is like must play. What does it lose to? It's hard to beat, bluntly. Magic is good against it, but Magic is dangerous. Echo is amazing against it because it says you can't Professor X here. So now I have a decent idea based on the locations of where you plan on Professor Xing, and I can counter that. I can try and get something big enough there to solve X and Claw or whatever else. Or I can go really big in other lanes and leave you nowhere good to Spider-Man. These are different ways you can win. You can also, if you give them the Professor X lane, reasonably often throw priority, at which point, like an Enchantress or Rogue, or obviously Echo, is incredibly powerful because you know they're very likely to play a Blue Marvel or Devil Dinosaur, cards which you shut down. Shang is good there, but if it's Blue Marvel, you're going to be sad, right? And you're also going to be sad, I guess, if it's Enchantress and they play Thanos. But again, you should be able to predict that, especially if the card is Echo, and then your own Shang-Chi or your own card that's honestly bigger than a 6/10 is doable. However, this is the most consistent deck and the easiest, most straightforward deck to play, and I strongly urge you to give it a spin. All right, that's this morning's video. I really hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching. I'll be back around 3 or 4 this afternoon with the same 5 archetypes, but the most successful ones from the most recent tournament. Thanks so much for watching. See you later.